have two objectives with this talk here this afternoon. So the first thing that I would like for you to leave with when you leave here today is to very, very clearly understand how these trace minerals flow in a cow, a bull, a heifer, and a calf. Where they come from, where they go, what they do. And then secondly, is to understand the risk areas. Because the one thing that I want you to leave with here, and if that's the only thing you leave with here, that's great, is these requirements for these trace minerals are not static. They don't need the same amount every day, 365 days of the year. They do need some every day, but there are certain periods of time when they need more. And I want you to clearly understand when those risk areas are and what we can do to address it. So I'm going to dig into this deal. And you know, why in 2016 do we talk about trace minerals? You know, why do we still need to discuss this thing? Haven't we figured it out and put it to bed? And what I want to show you here is in 1999, the government put some money up and they did forage analysis in 23 states in the US. And what I want you to look at is this section here. If we look at across the US, how many of the forages that we feed beef cattle or that they graze actually have enough trace mineral in them? That's where our problems start. Is if we look at copper, only 33% of forages in the US will meet cattle requirements. If we look at manganese, it's not that bad, about 85. Zinc, it sucks, it's 22. And selenium is bad as well as 30. Now, what compounds that problem is, unfortunately, there's also some minerals that we have in a little overabundance which tie up the good stuff that we're trying to get into these cattle. And the three big problems that we run into in the US are sulfur, iron, and molybdenum. What I want you to show is if we look at antagonists that tie up copper, this is what compounds our problem and what makes our problem complicated. Is about, if you add 33 and 12, we're at about 45% of forages has too high sulfur that'll tie up copper. Just about 20% of forages will have too high iron, and about 48, close on 50% of forages has too much molybdenum. Now, we haven't even touched water. And that, in my opinion, is a disgrace because water is the single biggest per volume thing that cattle will ingest on a daily basis. So whenever I deal with properties where we have a problem, the first thing we analyze is water. Because water will bring with it exactly these same things, sulfur, iron, and molybdenum. And there's no way you can get around that. You need to find a way to manage that. Okay, so that's just to put these things in perspective. If we look at where these big problems arise from forage point of view, I'm going to talk a little bit about selenium here. So when we talk about selenium, we need at least 0.1 parts per million in the diet of beef cow. Right, so where's that? The dark deal. At least 80% of forages and grains will provide 0.1 ppm. So the central part of the US is pretty good. We have enough selenium come into the forages and into the diet. So why do we still deal with selenium issues? Well, what did the ethanol industry provide us? It provided us a great resource because with the ethanol industry provided us with distillers' byproducts, which really provide good source of protein and a very good source of phosphorus. The problem is that because when you take the energy out of that corn in the distiller's product, when you make ethanol, basically what you do is you just triple protein, you triple phosphorus, but at the same time you triple sulfur. So the problem is that with the DDGs, it brought sulfur into a good commodity that we can use. We just need to be aware of what it's going to do. And where is the big DDG plants? They're all here. So if you overlay that on selenium, the reason why we're seeing more selenium issues is just we now have something that ties up the selenium. Right. Let's move over to copper. On copper, we need 10 parts per million. What I'm showing you here, you all know. If we look at areas where we have 10 to 12 parts per million of copper, it's really dark blue, well, it's there, 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 and there. For the rest, it's too low, and the central part of the US running into Mexico and into Canada really has less than half of the copper we need. So it's a primary problem. There's just not enough copper in the forages and the plants that we produce in the central US. Now, what compounds this problem with the copper side is this deal, the molybdenum. As soon as we have more than 2 parts per million molybdenum in a diet, it starts tying up copper and goes out the back side. Where do we have the high moly? Well, it's basically the whole western part of the US, and the southwestern part is exceptionally high in molybdenum. I'm going to backtrack you a little bit. Some of you may have been to this meeting. It was presented in 2005, Montana Livestock Forum and Nutrition Conference, and I want to show you some of this data out of 2005 because it's relevant. It's local Montana stuff. So basically what they did is they analyzed Montana grass hay samples. So they have the southeast, the southwest, northeast, northwest. If we look at copper, NRC requirements for beef cattle, 10 parts per million. You can see we have a problem 3, 6, 4, and 7. The problem is the grasses in Montana just do not have enough copper to provide the requirements for beef cow. If we look at molybdenum, it varies quite a bit. Southeast 3.3, southwest 1.1, northeast 2, northwest 1.1. And the problem that we run into is as soon as we have a copper of moly ratio of bigger than 5 to 1, it's okay because we have enough copper that can overcome the moly that ties it up. Well, in the southeast we don't, and in the northeast we don't. Southwest we have a big enough ratio, and in the northwest. So we have a little bit of a compounding issue with copper. Is number one is we don't, nowhere in Montana do we have enough, and in 2 parts of Montana, especially the eastern part of Montana, we have these moly that tie it up. And then zinc, you can see the pastures just don't have enough. All right, so enough of the doom and gloom. Let's move over to, so the plants don't have enough. That's why we devise other ways to get it into cattle. So we make something we can feed them because we need to get it into them. So we can make a free choice. We can make a supplement that has protein or energy with it, that we can drive it into cattle. And this is really the only way we can actually make a judgment call. If we stick a biopsy needle into a cow, pull out a piece of liver, we can say, well, she has enough or she doesn't have enough. That's how we do it. So if we look at the different states in the Midwest USA, what I want you to look at is this side here, where we have enough copper, adequate copper. So this is actual cattle that they sampled. And you can see in Colorado, we suck. 30% of cattle have enough copper in them. Kansas, not that bad, about half of them. Missouri, 63%. Montana, 61%. So what does this tell us? Well, if plants don't nearly have enough copper in them, and 60% of cattle in Montana has enough copper, you guys are doing a hell of a job in supplementing. You're doing something really right because you're finding ways to get that copper into the cattle. The cattle are not suffering that greatly. You see, Nebraska really sucks. Why? Well, they use a lot of DDG byproducts. It's close, it's cheap, and they don't do a great job of supplementing copper. North Dakota, it's an absolute nightmare. South Dakota, big deficiencies. Texas, again, 60% of cattle have enough copper in them. So in that same deal, they started looking at publications of when we supplement these trace minerals to beef cows, what do they do? If the diet doesn't have what we need to put in and we supplement it adequately, how does it help us? What does it do? So the first publications in 1988 came out and said, well, the first thing, if we fix these problems and issues with trace minerals, we shorten the time from the beginning of the breeding season to conception. So the simple thing is, we get more cows bred earlier on in the breeding season. We don't have a lot of stragglers, and we don't drag out this calving pattern. If we have enough mineral in there, they can repair themselves, and they can fall pregnant early, and they keep that pregnancy. The second thing is it can drive conception rates in cows, so you'll get more cows pregnant. That's the only two things in a cow herd that trace minerals really can help you with. They can get you to shorten up that breed back, and they can get a couple more cows pregnant. And this was done many, many years ago, so I'm not telling you new stuff. Then we had new, different formats of these minerals that are being produced, because people very quickly realized that if we just feed copper sulfate, all of this moly and sulfur, iron, it just binds that thing like a magnet binds to iron and just pulls it out the backside. So people were looking for new technologies to improve the way that we feed this into cattle. So these complexes were being put on the market, and there's a couple of them. There's chelated products that's bound to an amino acid like zinc methionine and those deals. There's some newer ones which are the hydroxy trace minerals, which are protected from the rumen. They only dissociate once they've gone past the rumen and they're in the abomasum. So what did these things offer? Well, earlier breeding dates in the breeding season. It's exactly the same as if we just do normal supplementation. But you can use less of this, and it's a little more efficient. Higher percentage of cows bred AI in synchronized breeding season. This is exactly the same thing. Because when you set up cattle for AI, you're synchronizing, and they just, whether you get earlier breeding dates or whether you get a higher percentage bred to AI, once they're synchronized, it just means that synchronization, those cattle were ready to conceive. Right. So let's look at how these things work. So whether we inject or whether we feed a trace mineral, and this holds true for us as people and for cattle. The first thing is it needs to be absorbed in the bloodstream. And in the blood, we have two different pools of these trace minerals. We have some in the juice, in the serum. That stuff can work in the immune system. It can work in the reproductive system. It flows through the animal. On a day-to-day basis, we need to make sure that there's enough in that serum to provide the needs of that animal. Now this red stuff, that just carries oxygen. There's a lot of copper, a lot of selenium in there, and a lot of iron in there. But it cannot be used for anything else than carry oxygen. And the dear Lord knew that cattlemen were going to have it tough. So he designed cattle with a storage organ, the liver. If we give a little too much, or a cow eats a little too much of that mineral, she doesn't pee it all out. It goes into the liver, and the liver can do three things with it. If we give it a little too much today, it can actually accept it and store it. That liver can also, when there's not enough in the diet, it'll push it back in the bloodstream, and it'll maintain that level. And if you really do it too much, it'll put it through the bile, and it'll go out the backside. So it has like a little pressure release valve to get rid of it. Now, unfortunately, all cattle have kidneys too, and on a day-to-day basis, the blood is going to be filtered in the kidneys, and they'll pee out a little bit of trace mineral. So there's trace mineral being lost every day in every human, every calf, every heifer, every cow, every bull. This is why we have to give mineral, or they have to have access to it every day. If they can't get it through the pasture, they can't get it through a supplement, if we keep them alive long enough, they'll just run out. And that's when we start seeing big problems. So it's a net loss because they use some of it and they lose some of it. Now, if I can call this my fuel line to get the minerals to where they need to be, this is the fuel tank where we can actually make sure we have enough in there for when they need it. Here, we need a spark plug, otherwise this thing is not going to run. And that's the two places where trace minerals work. By themselves, they do absolutely nothing. If you put copper into a cow, that copper by itself is going to do nothing. It has to be built into an enzyme system. So the cow will take that copper, it'll go to different places, and it will be built into enzyme systems, and those enzyme systems are the things that do the work. Why do I tell you this? Because these enzyme systems take a little bit of time to be produced. So if we put extra mineral in today, we can't breed those cattle tomorrow. It will not have time to achieve anything in that animal. If we look at how long it takes from changing diet or changing level to getting an enzyme system that really picks up, it takes about 28 to 30 days. Okay, so when we change these things, we need to change it a little bit ahead of time. That's why I want to show you, when you leave here today, when are these risk areas so that we can get the timing right. Because if you're going to spend the money, spend the time and the effort to do something, hell, you should get something for it. So I just want you to understand that the spark plugs, they take a little bit of time to get there. Now the nice thing is all of these enzymes are protein-based, like a piece of steak. If you put it on the counter today, it's not going to be rotten by this afternoon. It has a little bit of life to it. So all of these enzymes last somewhere between 90 and 120 days. So once we've made a nice change, we have a little bit of time. These animals are going to have lifespan of enzyme to work with. So what else do these minerals do except being part of these enzyme deals? Well, they're also structural parts of the animals. I'm going to use zinc as an example. So zinc is one of the key building blocks of keratin. Keratin is part of skin and hoof. If you don't have enough zinc, you don't have enough keratin, you have poor hoof quality. It's the same with selenium. We don't have enough selenium, we don't have enough glutathione peroxidase, we have poor muscle function, especially in the baby calf, poor sucking reflex, doesn't want to get up. So just bear that in mind. So they only do two things. They're either part of an enzyme system or they're part of the body. Right. What changes these mineral status? What things can mess with our mineral status? And these things are important. And the first one, I'm going to bitch about like a politician, because this is the reason why in 2016 we're still talking about trace mineral supplementation. It's because there are great products out there, well formulated, well put together, good quality minerals in them. If the damn cattle don't eat them, it just don't work. Now I'm going to show you a little bit. It is an inherent thing in cattle. There are some practical things here. I recently saw a paper where they just used the same product, same bag mineral, 2 different feeders. You get a feeder that has a little rubber flap over it, cattle stick their head in there, take it, or an open trough. 20% difference in intake, 20%, 1/5 less was consumed out of the one with the rubber lid. They looked at this thing from all different ways, and in the end they found that the only reason why that consumption was so poor in that device is because cattle don't like their heads where they can't see. They would much rather go somewhere where they can see, they're comfortable, they'll eat it out of it bunk. So just a very small thing, and you dropped it 20%. So intake, to me, is the single biggest problem that we have. And the one thing I want to warn you against is when we look at trace mineral supplementation on a ranch, how many of you have one way of putting these minerals into the cattle? How many of you have 2 or more ways of putting the minerals in there? You need to change that. Because what happens is the more choice you give them, the more variability you create. If you have a single source, it's one thing that you have to fine-tune, either with salt to limit intake or make them want to go there, or improve palatability with something like molasses to get them to take it in. As soon as you have 2 or 3 sources, they're going to neglect one of them, and they're going to be really good at the other one of them. And the problem is, if you have a feed mill make a mistake, I've seen this twice this year, where they overblend one of them, Now you have a second source or a third source there. Your risk of getting too much of something in there now just becomes a big issue. So if you have multiple sources, try and tone it down so you have one supplement that you can manage and really manage that intake and get that intake really good. I'm going to say a couple of words of absorption. It's another reason why we struggle with these things, is absorption of trace minerals suck. Copper, on average, inorganic copper sources has an absorption rate of 5%. So only 5% of what we blend into a diet actually gets into the bloodstream of the animal. 95% goes out the backside of the animal. Manganese is even poorer. It's about 1.25%. Now, by the grace, zinc and selenium are pretty good. They're both in that 30% range. So just understand that these things are not absorbed in great quantities. Antagonist we've talked about, so I'm not going to talk about that. Depletion I'm going to talk about because cattle will drop trace mineral status certain times of the production cycle. And those are things we need to understand. So this is a study that was just recently published, 2016. They were just looking at taking stocker steers on wheat, give them a good free choice, and just see how they take it in. So basically what they were looking at is at different dates, the average daily intake in grams per head in that group of stockers. Just look at that variation. It varied from 39 grams per head per day right up to 142 grams per head per day. So it's, even if you do a good job and you have one thing in there, you need to just understand that there's going to be some cattle that are going to eat a lot and some are not. The problem is this all jacks with performance. So if you have cattle that just don't really go to that feeder and they don't hit that feeder, average daily gain is going to be lower than animals that really hit that feed bunk. So then this was mineral only with salt. Right. Let's take beef cattle and we start at the beginning and we run. And we look at how these trace minerals flow. So the first thing is this calf. When does this calf's trace mineral nutrition begin? Calf health and performance begins at conception. If we screw up that thing early on, we have a lifelong problem that we've got to deal with. I'll quickly explain this. If we look at a cow, the majority of cows that we breed will conceive, about 95% of them. Why don't we all have 95% calving rate? It's because a lot of cows will resorb that embryo in that first 42 days. Round about that day 42, when implantation of that embryo needs to happen, they'll resorb it. Something's not right, they'll resorb it, they'll come and heat again, and they'll take again in that second or third cycle, and okay, so now you have all these bloody stragglers. Why does that happen? This embryo is just one thing. It is a cell that just multiplies at an enormous rate. When do we really struggle to breed cows? When it's cool or when it's hot? When it's hot. Why? Because the cow has to provide an environment for this thing to grow like hell and keep it healthy. What does any rapidly dividing cell do? It needs a lot of oxygen, it needs a lot of food, but what does it produce? It produces a lot of carbon dioxide, metabolites, nasty stuff. If we don't have a way to protect these things and remove their refuse, they'll drown in their own funk. That's exactly what happens in high heat environment. The cow has a lot of her own tissues that are burning up. It's too hot. That's why in Florida they go stand in the ponds. They just need somewhere where it's a little cooler and something just to get rid of heat. As soon as you have heat in this animal, you're going to struggle to have enough antioxidants to mop up and help this embryo. So, one of the first key risk areas that we deal with is before you start a breeding season, is that first 60 days before that breeding season. Because before you start your breeding season, if you don't have enough antioxidants the day you open that gate and you put that bull in there, what's going to happen in that initial bunch of cows that are going to fall pregnant? If they don't have enough of this antioxidants, they're going to fall pregnant, they're going to resorb, they're going to be stragglers. That's why the old data that I showed you, if we supplement them correctly, what do? We get more bred early, we get a couple more to retain those pregnancies. Okay. Let's talk about how this thing flows further. So now we have a calf, a fetus that's developing inside that cow. Where does that fetus get its nutrition from? All of the nutrition in that fetus comes through the umbilicus. So the afterbirth has these little deals where they attach to the uterus of the cow, and everything that's water soluble can cross that thing. So what's water soluble? Is glucose water soluble? Yeah, it can go. Some of the proteins can go. Oxygen can go. Water can go. All the trace minerals are water soluble. They can go. What is not water soluble? Vitamin A and vitamin E. Okay, so that is a risky thing for a calf because we don't have a calf that gets fed vitamin A and E from the cow while it's inside the cow. The problem is that needs to come through the colostrum. So if we don't have good colostral management, we may have a calf with some A and E issues. All right, so the minerals, they'll flow through here into that calf. Okay, so this umbilical vein, where does it go in a calf? Well, that umbilical vein runs into the liver. So what does this cow do in that last 2 months when she's pregnant? Well, she starts stacking this baby calf with mineral. She fills that liver up at her own cost. Why does she do that? Why would the cow pre-pack the calf before it's born? They do that because that is the only opportunity that they have to do it. Cow's milk does not have trace mineral in it. Very, very low levels. If we look at a calf's requirements, we need 10 parts per million copper, 30 parts per million manganese, 20 parts per million zinc, 0.1 selenium. Look at how much is in milk, cow's milk. If she does not pre-stack it, that calf will run out of minerals so quick that immune system won't work. It's going to scour, it's going to have respiratory disease, it's going to be a poor doer, it's going to be a difficult calf to keep alive and raise it. Just be aware, we win or lose the battle of a calf while it's inside the cow. This work was done in Saskatchewan in Canada. And basically what they did is they looked at cow liver levels, the different trimesters, and the calf liver. And I just want to show you two things. The first thing you can see is from first to second to third trimester, the line runs like this. She doesn't put a lot of copper in the first trimester, second trimester. She puts a hell of a lot of copper in there in the last trimester. So the big stacking happens late on, just before calving. The second thing I want to show you, if the cow has a little copper, the calf will have little copper. If the cow has a lot of copper, the calf will have a lot of copper. But the calf will always have more copper than the cow on a milligram per pound basis of liver. She will preferentially stack him so that he has something to run with. And I'll show you now why she does that. So this work was done by Connie Swenson. Very, very good study. She did serum. So she pulled blood, did liver biopsies, and looked at a cow over a whole production cycle. So this principle applies to all the different minerals. So what happens is, pre-calving, the storage organ, the liver, is going to go down. Why? Well, she's just shunting it. She's shunting that mineral from that liver into the serum. Why is she doing that? It's just a vehicle to shove it into the calf. So she's just putting it into the blood. It'll circulate through that calf. It's going to stick in that calf's liver. The problem is when she calves, when that umbilicus breaks, well, that whole bag of mineral that's now in a calf's skin is removed from that cow. It's gone. Calf's on its way. The cow now has to make a plan and replenish herself. If we leave her to her own devices, she will eat and get better, but we're going to miss the breeding season. She's going to be at that pre-calving level right when we wean. In nature, this is exactly how elk and deer do it. Once they wean, they're ready to conceive again. They won't do it beforehand, because that's how long it takes you to get all these minerals back up again. What do? We want to breed them back as quick as we can once they've calved. So we need to find a way to change this hole that we have here. This thing is going to happen in each and every cow that calves, every mare that foals, every sheep that pops a lamb. This is how it works. So, and I'll talk a little bit about the injectable. It's my job. So with the Multimin, we did some work at Texas A&M where we said, okay, if we know that a cow needs some mineral before she drops that calf, and she needs mineral before we breed her, why don't we evaluate putting the Multimin into that cow just twice a year? We put it in somewhere before calving, and what does it do? Well, the only thing it does is it delays this hit that the cow takes. Every cow will take that hit because she's going to drop a calf. There's no way we can get around that. The second thing is, if we put it in before breeding, we can very nicely elevate that level right at breeding time. Again, we need this minimum of 30 days. I want to talk a little bit about the condition score, because we're talking about minerals here and it's not the be all and end all. It's part of a bigger picture. But I want to show you a little bit of the effect on body condition score on number one, how long cow stays open, and how many of them get pregnant. So you can see it's a very simple thing. Everybody knows this really. If we get the cows in better condition, we will get them bred quicker and we will get more of them bred. And I want you to remember this thing when we talk about how we can manipulate trace minerals in cattle that are undergoing a drought, cows that are in a drought situation. So I want to show you a little bit, and this is exactly how it works. You don't see fantastic jumps when you put trace mineral with cows. You see a 3-4% jump in preg rates. It's not dramatic unless you're in an area where you have an antagonist problem. Texas A&M had a massive problem with copper being tied up by iron. These guys in Missouri, big problem with molybdenum. Kansas State, no issues. There's no antagonists on their Flint Hill pasture. It just goes well. This is the typical thing that we see. 2 shots of Multimin gives you that 3 percentage point jump in preg rates. If we look at timed AI, this was done at Kansas State again. You can see we can get more cows bred earlier on, or as a result of synchronized AI. And this is exactly what you see in your calving distribution. We just back it up. You'll still have the normal distribution, but you'll just get more bred earlier on. So whether we feed it, whether we inject it, the principles apply exactly the same, because we're just changing the route of how we get it in there. The only advantage that the injectable offers over an oral, and please don't make the mistake that I'm saying an oral should be taken out or the Multimin will replace it. The only thing that we do with the Multimin is we plug these holes that these animals have. But there's a couple of things it'll do that the oral won't do. Number one is it will work really fast. Because we're injecting it, it goes into the system immediately. So within 8 to 10 hours, that stuff is peaked in the animal. If you feed it, it'll take weeks to get it up. The second thing is, because you inject it, you bypass the antagonist. So anything that'll tie it up, well, we're not going through the gut, so you're circumvented that. And the third thing is, if you run 100 cows through the chute and you give it, you got 100 cows that supplement it. They don't have a choice. Once you pull that needle out, it's done. You got it. Go along. So I want to talk a little bit about this. If we get more calves born earlier in that calving season. What does that mean? So this was a study published by Rick Funston, and they used big numbers of heifers. You'll see 650, 363 there. So this was heifers being born in the first 20 days of the calving season, second 20 days, third 20 days. And I always tell people, if you have the opportunity to tag animals and mark them, the ones that are born in that first 20 days, take a knife or a hole punch or whatever the hell, I don't care, but mark that tag, because those ones you need to keep. These ones you can sell to your neighbor. These ones you sell at sale barn. And I'll show you why. It is a very simple management thing, but the data is there to show us how you make money out of this. So if we look at a heifer that's born in the first 20 days or 21 days of a calving season, if we look at them falling pregnant once we breed them, they have the highest rate of pregnancy. Why? It's very simple. They had 20 days on these suckers and 40 days on those suckers growing. They should be bigger and heavier and ready to breed. It just makes them more efficient. If we look at how many of them will calve in the first 21 days, 81, 69, 65. It's something that perpetuates itself. It keeps over time making your calving interval shorter and shorter. Pulling calves, our favorite pastime. Well, lo and behold, they're the ones, because they're bigger, because they had more time, they reach puberty properly, and they're big enough to pop calf or sell. Our big problem, getting them bred again. They're also the ones that breed back at the highest level. So very simple, but that's why we try and get more calves born early on. On the steer side, it's very simple. Pounds. These ones are just heavier than these ones, heavier than these ones, and really you end up with a bigger carcass and more pounds to sell. So if you retain ownership and you feed cattle, these ones you keep, these ones you sell to your neighbor, these ones you sell at sale barn. Very simple. Something else they found is they looked at how long do these animals stay in your herd, so we don't continuously have to retain heifers to build herd. Cattle that were born in that first 22 days, 21 day cycle, they stayed in the herd the longest because they never got late. So they stayed long enough. They weren't culled at the same levels as animals that were born in the second or third cycle. Okay, so when we look at a beef cow, when are our two key critical points? Well, the first one is between conceiving and calving. So we need to make sure that at least in that last trimester, when that cow is putting all that mineral in that calf, we need to have a plan. Then she's going to drop that calf, and then at a minimum, at the latest, 30 days before you breed those cows, you have to have something that's working, that's putting back what that calf took out. Right, now we switch gears and we go over to the calf. I'm going to get back to that. But this is exactly what happens to that calf. So the cow is going to drop that calf with a lot of mineral in it. What's that calf going to do? It's going to start growing. As it grows, what does it do with the mineral that it was born with? It's going to burn through it pretty quick. By the time we hit 56 days of age, they will have burned through exactly 3/4 of what they were born with. Okay, so that's typically when we do branding or branding vaccinations. That's in that 70 to 90 days of age. That's when they've burned through it. Are they eating anything here? A little bit. They drink milk, they nibble, but they're not busy repairing themselves. Why do so many of our preconditioning programs fail? Because where do we wean them? We wean them when they're almost empty. And what do? We stick them a vaccine and say, there you go, buddy. Respond to this one. There's no fuel in them to respond to it. So this is a really key point. So when we look at a calf, if we don't have a cow that was well supplemented, you need to understand that that calf is going to be born lower, right? Okay? At around about this day, 60 to 90, that's a period where we handle most of these calves and we can do something to them. And then pre-weaning, we need to do something. And just be aware, if that cow starts low and she drops a calf that starts low, man, he's going to be through that mineral much quicker. And that's when we see all these big scour breaks and big respiratory breaks. It's the immune system just does not have enough to run on there. So the calf gets good colostrum, really good colostrum. What's in the colostrum that we're after? We're after antibodies against disease. So it comes with BVD antibodies, it comes with IBR antibodies. What happens to those antibodies in a calf? Well, once it's suckled, it'll have a bunch of them. It's to keep it healthy. When do they run out of the stuff? Well, it goes down, but you can see here by somewhere between day 56 and day 80, we've lost half of what they were born with. So that's when we do the first calf food vaccination, is because, well, whatever mama gave them is coming down, so it's not going to be protected anymore, so we're going to give it a vaccine to fix itself up. That's perfectly fine. When do we run out of mineral? Exactly when we do that. So just be aware. This is why we need to find a way to pay attention and do something to these calves when we vaccinate them there. This was work I did with a gentleman out of the University of Florida. We took 3-month-old beef calves, we vaccinated them with a modified live vaccine, and we tracked their mineral levels for 2 weeks post-vaccination. One set, we gave them an injectable mineral to help boost it up. The other set only had their creep feed or whatever they had as an oral to deal with. And I want to show you there's two of them, two minerals that really take a hit when you put a modified live into these animals. Zinc takes a big hit, and that's perfectly normal. How many of you have gone to the pharmacy when you have flu and they give you a little thing to suck on and it's full of zinc? Zinc is the single mineral that plays the biggest role in viral immune system of any mammal. So it's completely understandable why the zinc dropped like that, because we just put 5 different viruses in them and said, away you go, buddy. So they will use that mineral to drive that immune response. They do exactly the same with selenium. They burn through a fair bit of selenium. There's a lot of work out there that showed if you give selenium and you vaccinate, then these cattle actually perform a little better from the immune side. But I wanted to show you this because it goes back to this thing. If we have an animal that looks like this, and we stick a vaccine into it, number one is the vaccine is not going to really work the way it should, or the calf is not going to respond the way it should. And number two, how many times have I heard that people told me, you know, I just don't get it. These vaccines ain't worth nothing. We vaccinated a month ago and everything is breaking with summer pneumonia. Why did that happen? What do we do to that calf once we stuck that vaccine into it? Well, we just drop the mineral levels. If there's no way to put it back and the little sucker's not eating anything, we're genetically selecting for animals that grow faster and faster and faster, and we will need to find some ways to support them to keep the health side up. If we look at the calf, what's your 3 risk areas? The number 1 risk area is at birth. I have a lot of guys in Nebraska that now use an injectable the day of birth. Why? Because they've overdone this DDG thing. They feed too much distillers. They know that that cow doesn't get enough mineral. That calf is going to be kind of dicey when it's born. Branding, or 70 to 90 days of age. Why? Because we're going to vaccinate that calf. We're going to look at definitely running out of mineral there and also running out of maternal protection. And then in any weaning or preconditioning program, if you haven't done anything here or here, this will be the minimum thing, especially if you retain ownership of those cattle. If those are heifers you're going to develop or something, to help them transition through that weaning stress and manage vaccines, we need to pay attention there. Let's look at the bull. Change gears again. If we look at the bull, a couple of things. Just a little bit of a wrap up of what do these minerals do in a bull? Why do we need them? So copper drives libido. That's why Viagra is blue. It needs to look like copper. Very simple. If you don't have enough copper, we decrease spermatogenesis. So semen count goes down. If we don't have enough zinc, zinc drives appetite. So we won't have as good a growth. We'll delay puberty. We'll decrease testicular size. And unfortunately, zinc and copper are like brothers. Will decrease libido. Manganese, very strong antioxidant through one of the enzyme systems, will have an increase in abnormal sperm. I quickly want to go through the physiology here, because really what we do is all the sperm is produced in the testicles, but when we produce a semen sample for the cow to fall pregnant, there's two components to it. The semen is half of that, but then all of these glands, the prostate, cowpers, and the seminal vesicles, produce seminal fluid. What does that seminal fluid do? Well, it's food. There's a lot of energy in there. There's a pH buffer in there. And there's a whole bunch of antioxidants in there. Ring a bell with when the cow was conceiving. What did we need? We needed a lot of antioxidants to get that embryo and keep it alive. Why? It was multiplying very fast. What do these suckers do? I mean, they swim all the time. Imagine how much energy they're using and how many metabolites they're excreting. That's why semen is such a sensitive tissue to work with. Zinc plays a key role in the tail end of semen because it's keratin based. It's just a whoop. So if we don't have enough zinc, they break off. Selenium plays a key role in the battery. It makes it fly. So if we don't have enough selenium, we see a lot of mid-piece breakages. And between copper, zinc, and selenium, it drives progressive motility that we want. I'm not going to talk a lot about the seminal fluid, but seminal fluid, as I said, their single purpose is to provide food and keep it clean. Semen production takes a little bit of time. So once that semen is produced, it's actually stored in the epididymis for a period of time to mature. And during that maturation period, it needs to be bathed with these antioxidants to stay healthy. So I just want to show you a little bit of work we did at Kansas State with Multimin, putting it in 42 days before we did a semen analysis. And you can see animals that didn't get it, animals that got it. Concentration is a little better. Amount of normal sperm is a little better. This progressive sperm thing, I don't think it's anything, but it was a little up. But it's something that you can do to help those breeding bulls. So when we talk about bulls, there's really two different populations of bulls. The first one is the developing bull, which we need to do something with them at weaning, something again 90 days later, because very soon after that, we're going to screen that bull, and if you sell young bulls, then it's going to go to sale. In a breeding bull that you use 45 to 60 days before we start using that bull, we need to make sure that there's enough antioxidants in that bull. Let's talk about heifers quickly. And I got some bad news and some good news. So the first thing is, there's two ways to develop heifers. You can either put them in a feed yard, pay somebody to feed them up and develop them, or you can do it on pasture. Now, as soon as you develop them on pasture, variability of intake comes in. In the feed yard, man, they got to eat what's in the bunk. Very simple. So we ran two feed yard studies, or two heifer studies, one in a feed yard and two separate ones on pasture. So what I want to show you is, if we develop heifers in a feed yard, you will get no value by giving them Multimin. That total mixed ration removes all the variability. Preg rate is exactly the same whether you had Multimin or not. So if you feed heifers on a feed yard deal, no point in doing it. If you do it on pasture, it's a little different. You can see University of Illinois, University of Idaho, you get more animals bred because the variability is there and antagonism is real. So in the heifer, it's just the other way around as the cow. First area you need to pay attention is that 30 to 60 days before you breed her the first time, and then again pre-calving, because remember, when that heifer calves, she's still growing. Okay, so she has a little bit of a higher requirement than the cow. I want to conclude with a little bit of a couple of points on embryo transfer. Those of you that do embryo transfer, remember now we're putting a rapidly dividing embryo into a recipient which has not really been prepared for this because it's not her own tissue, number one. And number two, she now needs to take this thing and fall pregnant with it. That embryo uses exceptionally large units of oxygen, and it needs a lot of these antioxidants to survive. I want to show you some work we did in Brazil. We see significantly more embryos sticking and less of them dying off once you put them in there, because right up to this day 48 is when we see a lot of those embryos being resorbed. My last two slides is on drought. I was contacted by John Arthington in Florida 3 years ago. They went through a hell of a bad drought. He said, man, these producers are killing me. We're in the trap, and we need to just look at anything to make us a little more money. They made available 3,500 cows for us to do a study. It's completely wrong. Everything was wrong about that study. The bulls had already been turned out to the cows. The cows were thin. It was miserable. They said, well, will the Multimin do something bad if we give it to the cows when the bulls are in? I said, well, I don't know. We've never tested it that way because physiologically it doesn't make any sense. They said, well, they gave us 3,500 cows. We're going to do this thing. We're going to give it once and just look at what happens at the end of that breeding season. And this is the data, how it broke out. So if we look at cattle that had more than a 5.5%, or more than a 5.5 body condition score, there was no difference by putting the Multimin in there in a drought. If we look at cattle that had between 5 to 5.5, a little bit of benefit, but I would discount that to nothing. If we look at the cows that were really thin and miserable, less than 4.5, that's where we made the money because it's a single $2.50 injection that they put in there. For 3% more calves, that was a handsome return on investment. So what I'm saying is, not only are these thin cows usually protein and energy deficient, but they're also really out of whack with these minerals. And if you could just put the mineral in there, it just helps that metabolism of that cow to go and to maybe retain that pregnancy. So if we look at these protocols, I'm going to just recap them. If we look at a bull, we need to pay attention to a young developing bull at weaning, and again 90 days later, because 90 days after this is when we do that final BSE, and we're going to cut that bull. Is it in or out for a sale? Breeding bull, 45 to 60 days before the breeding season. Calf, we have opportunity at birth. If the cow wasn't any good, branding, we know that this calf is going to have fallen. This is critical because we're going to wean it. 95% of calves in the U.S. deficient in copper, zinc, and selenium, or a mix thereof. The cow, we need to pay attention pre-calving because she's going to put that into the calf, and we need to have some way to fix her up 30 days pre-breeding because she's going to have a hell of a hole that she's got to climb out of. And then the heifer, we need to do 30 days pre-breeding, and again, before she calves.